Welcome to the second video on our unit on trig substitution. We're going to focus this video on just this little box right here, Pythagorean identities. So as I go through and write a few things down, just make sure you are keeping an eye on this and trying to figure out why these rules are written the way they are. So one thing I hope you know, either we've talked about it or you learned in the previous class, is that if we think about a circle on a coordinate plane centered around the origin. Here's my circle right here, a great one probably. But if we were to look at that circle centered at the origin, the formula for that is x squared plus y squared equals the radius squared. So if I pick any point right here, and I thought, let me change colors here a second. Come on. What color? There we go. Okay. So if I think about this far, and this far, and this far, come on now. There we go. This is x, this is y, and that's the radius. Those three things together kind of work together and create x squared plus y squared equals r squared. So what we know and what we've kind of studied so far is that often on the unit circle, we know we have an extra variable in here. We have this angle in here that we call theta. There's my theta, not super clear, but hopefully good enough. And we know that x is the same thing as cosine of theta. So cosine of theta being squared is going to equal, or adding to that, we add y squared, which we know y is the same thing as sine of theta. So sine of theta being squared. And on a unit circle, we know that the radius is always 1. So we're going to square that. And if I wanted to simplify that a little bit, one thing we use for shorthand is instead of using all the parentheses that you see there so far, we would just say cosine of theta. And we put a little 2 here, and that means cosine of theta being squared. And so this would mean sine of theta being squared. And then 1 squared is just 1. So that's kind of that first identity that you saw in our notes on the formulas there. That's where that came from, just knowing the basic formula for a circle right here, realizing that if we think about the unit circle where our radius is 1, x is replaced with cosine of theta, and y is replaced with sine of theta, and then we can use some shorthand notation to get to this. Okay, if you trust this and you believe this, I'm going to erase some of this stuff here a second. There we go. And just start from scratch again. So if I have cosine of theta squared plus sine of theta squared equaling 1, if I were to take this entire statement and divide all of it by cosine squared, so it's legal to do that as long as I divide every single thing by the same idea. So all three parts get divided by cosine of theta squared. Well, the first fraction that I've created is just 1. The second fraction that I've created, well, sine over cosine is tangent, so sine squared over cosine squared is tangent squared. And then if 1 over cosine is secant, that means 1 over cosine squared is secant squared. And I've just created the second identity that you see in your notes. And we could do something very, very similar by taking that first identity, cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1, and dividing every single chunk by sine squared. We would get the same thing as the third identity. So if you have questions on that, feel free to ask in class tomorrow, and I will gladly show you. Otherwise, just try to figure that out right now, and you'll see that that is a true statement.